Hi, this presentation is on chickens in depth part two. We've already done chickens basics and chickens in depth part one, but there was a lot more information to cover. So this is chickens in depth part two. I realize that I am pulling from a book, and so there's a lot to share. Obviously, I can't share all of it. If you do want all that information, definitely check out the book. But I did feel like there was so much more to explain after the first few presentations. And so I did want to go a little more in depth. I was interested in homesteading myself. Um, and so this might be applicable for other people's also who might be interested. Definitely check your local ordinances. I know where I'm at currently, you need an acre of land for chickens, which I do not have. So I actually have very little experience with chickens in person myself. And so this is literally pretty much going to be just material from the book. Um, I, but if there's something that is wrong, definitely share with me, give me feedback. I would love to know your thoughts as people who might have more experience with chickens. So we're all about learning here and all about sharing and kindness. So let's just get right in. We'll get started making eggs and babies. Making babies. Cockerels can mate by 6 months. Pullets can have viable chicks by about 7 months. Chickens are vulnerable when laying, so they may search out corners or dark spaces that would offer more protection in a natural environment for both themselves and the eggs too. They generally, if you are keeping chickens as they are domesticated, you will generally have like a coop, and so you will have like nesting boxes kind of built in. Of course, you can design your own coops, and then you would make sure that you had nesting boxes in there as well anyway, enough for the chickens, using um, the dimensions based on how many chickens you want to have. Um, so, um, so they can naturally try to search out those corners, those spaces. So having the nesting boxes kind of tucked away, not directly in the center of your coop, is generally the form that is followed. Just keeping them off to the sides, and that's pretty normal. So but the chickens can lay eggs outside of the coop. So there are different methods you can do to kind of get them used to nests, and kind of sort of train them to be in the nests. And that's something that could be case by case, but just something to kind of bear in mind. They may lay on the ground or on the floor. Many can and do lay in the nests because that will keep the eggs safer and cleaner. That is obviously the human preference, is to have the eggs safer and cleaner, especially if they do want to use them for cooking, um, or crafts, having them safe and clean. But let's see. Chickens lay a few eggs at a time before brooding, sitting on their nest to warm the eggs until they hatch. They generally hatch after 21 days. The nesting materials may include straw, hay, and wood chips. Apologies, this one I think got a little out of order here. That it should have been directly next to that, the one prior to this. So, but nesting materials may include straw, hay, and wood chips. Make sure they have enough space. The book I read did actually suggest the wood chips, and I had not heard that before. To me, that seems kind of sharper and pointier and perhaps less comfortable than straw or hay, but they do have more longevity. I don't know. That's something that you could experiment with. I would probably, I don't know that I would lean into wood chips, but it was suggested. So So that's just something you can kind of think about. What else could you use? What else do they like? What would be there naturally, organically? Just because chickens, before domestication, if there was such a time, we've had them around for forever. But what would they have used? Grasses, no doubt. So that might lend itself to the hay and the things like that. But just kind of think about it. They can have a number of eggs before they start brooding, and which is sitting on the eggs and keeping them warm to hatch. Chickens can lay an egg every 25 or so hours. When they have a day off from producing an egg, that signals the end of the laying cycle, suggesting that the clutch is complete. Eggshells, they come in many sizes and colors. The coloring is determined by the chemistry within the formation process. The shell is comprised of calcium carbonate and can take up to 20 hours to solidify during the laying process. Egg colors include white, brown, pink, blue, and speckled. They also have a kind of a natural sheen on them. It's called the bloom, and that protects them from bacteria. So it is suggested that washing the eggs can actually be a little detrimental, just because of that natural protective layer. It also said that some of the bloom, the quote unquote bloom, can come off. So if you have like colored eggs, some of that might wipe off a little bit. And that's something I don't know too much about. Kind of skeptical part of me said, oh, but if they're trying for fancy colored eggs, they might paint them themselves. And so of course some of that would rub off. And so just be mindful. It's an egg conspiracy. Most eggs come white though, and a lot of folks primarily deal with white eggs, and so that's not that big of a deal, but just something of kind of looking at bloom and color. Um, let's see. When not fertilized, the eggs can be graded for quality. Double A are newer with firm yolks and good cracking. A are a little older with looser yolks, and B might have flecks of blood or meat used more commercially for other egg products. Eggs are stored in cartons with variable coverage, which can be experimented with, and they are refrigerated so that they last longer. They can also be stored frozen for up to a year. If an egg has been pooped on by a chicken, the bacteria is deemed unsafe and the eggs are not meant to be eaten. Slightly dirty eggs, though, can just be washed off. I think that, this one, with pooping, sometimes that comes naturally in the pushing process for like animals giving birth. And so this one is a tough one. I don't know how the industry runs it or, what systems they have in place. That's something to definitely think about. But even, reading about chickens, they say even particulates of the poop are a hazard, and so they want optimum ventilation in the coop, which you'll see with other excrement from animals as well, just because of the burn quality of the gases that are contained, but just thinking of the chemicals and the chemistry of it. I'm not an expert. I don't know the microbial scene on these things. There's a later slide that suggests the passing of E. coli and salmonella that is associated with eggs and egg products, and so that is just something to bear in mind. Definitely do the research. You do want to stay safe, and be conscientious. It seems like poop on an egg might not be the worst thing, but maybe it's something that you want to take a little more seriously, or at least do the science of it to kind of be conscientious, because we don't want people to get sick. if the eggs are fertilized, you can candle them, and that's when you put them on like a light source, and you can see inside of the egg, and that kind of gives the observer a better glimpse of what is inside of it, um, which is kind of cool because you can see the embryo developing into the bird, and that is suggested on day 7 and day 14, just to double check too, to make sure that the fetuses are developing properly, and that they're going to be okay. And it's kind of a cool thing to be able to see inside of there with a light. Obviously, you can't see, but it's still pretty cool to think about. Hatching. A chick should be able to extricate itself from its egg within 24 hours of the first pip, because they kind of peck at the egg and are able to get themselves out. It was discussed in the book that if they're not strong enough, they may not be able to extricate themselves, and those are generally kind of called. They're not strong enough. They're probably sickly. They're poorly, and so sometimes those will just be left, and uh, kind of you just kind of move on, but there can be slower extrications from shells as well. It did say that the process can kind of drag on a little bit, and that does happen sometimes, so that's kind of at your discretion to see what's going on and to make judgment calls based on that. Humidity and temperature may factor in, and such can be adjusted if/when an incubator is being used or is available. If you are interested in incubators, I think that would be a different session, but I think I'd want to get an incubator first and kind of get that hands-on experience, to play with that. And I would obviously do the research and get that information when I am able to invest in chickens. Right now, like I said, I'm not able to due to local parameters for owning chickens, but definitely um, checking in on options there. It might be a little safer, especially if the chickens aren't prone to brooding. If they don't want to sit still and take care of those eggs, having an incubator there for safety might be a good option. But that could be a separate presentation. It could be a separate complete adventure. But that's just something that you can think about. Humidity and temperature is something that plays a very large role. And so that is something that you could experiment with a little bit. Just kind of be conscientious of the exact temperatures that you're working with. Variability is said to potentially affect the birth rates and longevity for the birds, and so just being mindful of that, and definitely I would suggest doing research on that too, because you want, again, that optimum health for the birds, and that can sometimes start with birth. So chicks stay close to mom for about 2 weeks post hatching before they venture off, returning periodically for warmth and comfort. It doesn't necessarily mean that they venture far, but they are able to kind of move about more than other animals might be, who have to learn to walk. That might take a little bit longer, but they can kind of move around, and so that's something to bear in mind. And sometimes they are also not kept with their mom, especially if you buy them and bring them in, or if you want to do the science and ensure temperatures and things, they might not stay with the mom if with human intervention. And of course, they are domestic animals, so generally you will have a decent amount of human intervention. But that is something to kind of bear in mind. They can walk early, and they can kind of go off and get themselves into trouble. Fluffy, cute bird trouble. Ensure chicks can find water after being born. The book said that you can dip their beaks into the water, which will allow them to drink, and also teach them where the drinking water is, and that as a behavior, so that they can repeat it and they can kind of take care of themselves. You obviously want to ensure that you are not forcing, too much, or pushing too hard. You want to be conscientious of their breathing capacities, and so just it's said that it's an instinct to drink the water, but still being conscientious of that is something that might be best practices. And you definitely want to have the water available. That is a requirement. So, chick enclosures. Newborns like a warm environment, so having a heat lamp at about 18 inches will keep them warm as they grow. The lamp should be raised 3 inches every week to accommodate growth, while also keeping it a tolerable temperature that is not too hot. Sometimes babies surprise you. You might not be prepared for them. If the rooster gets out, gets feisty, you know, that is an eventuality sometimes. Um, but the chicks do need that warmth, and they for safety as well. And so having a heat lamp does help. You do want to make sure it's not too close, because you don't want them to get too hot, because that can actually negatively affect their health. But this is what it was suggested in the book. Of course, that depends on the heat of the lamp, but also ensuring that they don't burn themselves on it either, because those can get pretty warm. Obviously, that is their purpose. So um, so that is something that you might not find that heat in the natural environment as well, or without a specific place for the chicks to kind of get a little more autonomy when they are newborn. So just something to think about if you are raising the chicks. You can buy them as hatched or straight run, which means that you would just take the clutch as it is hatched, and so that means you wouldn't worry if they're boys or girls. But you can also request a certain number of pullets to cockerels. Um, but they are small birds and they're not necessarily developed, and so that takes more effort for sure. So that's just something you can buy chicks and raise your chicks. You can also buy different ages, not just chicks. You can buy started birds, or mature birds. So started birds are just adolescents. They're aging out of the chick stage, but they're not fully mature yet. Um, so there are benefits to each of these, if you don't want to have to deal with the hassle of the heat lamps and all the fancy stuff of having the chicks, the incubation, and if you want to skip those couple steps, you can get this started, and then make sure that you have the full egg um, cycle time frame at your disposal if you are trying to um, buy them to sell eggs, or to have that egg production started. Might be a good option for you. Mature birds, of course, um, they are mature. You want to watch for health and for um, you know for the optimum egg production, if that is something that you want. It's called a spent hen if the bird has kind of aged out of, or no longer produces as many eggs, and that is a natural process. So a spent hen, it probably won't help you if you are trying to produce eggs, because they have aged out of that period of their life. Hold on. Sorry, my laptop is being a little bit slow here. Okay. Watch for parasites and illness. Also note that the illness may be temporary. It said that sometimes you'll hear like bird coughs that can connote sickness. You can tune into that. But it can spread pretty quickly if you have like chicks together. Obviously, in the coop, there might be some spreading of those diseases. So just be mindful of that. You probably don't want to sell sick birds, and you want to allow that illness to um, you know to resolve. You want them to heal, but definitely check into it. Illness and parasites, those can spread. You want the optimum primo health for everyone, so look into it, and take care of those birds if they do get sick. And they can also spread illness, the salmonella and the E. coli, which we kind of talked about. It was actually suggested that they are kept away from food crops. Some animals are brought in specifically to leave their fertilizer, in order to better cultivate the crops. But in this circumstance, it actually suggested the opposite, and to not have chickens around, just because of that chance at the salmonella and the E. coli. Breeds, there are many, many breeds. This is a list that I'm sure barely brushes the surface. But we have Ancona, Andalusian, Barnvelder, Camping, Catalana, Krevker, Hamburg, La Flèche, Wyandotte, Lachenvelder, Leghorn, Minorca, Norwegian Jarhorn, Orloff, Polish Redcap, Rhode Islanders, and there are a few different colors of the Rhode Islanders, Cornish, Modern Game, Old English Game, Spanish, plus a number of others. I'm sure that some of them have a few names that they go by. That's pretty traditional for plants, and so that might translate over to animals as well. But do note that some are noisy and they can fly about precociously. Some of them, they're not known to be flyers per se, but they can hop around, and some do get some air. So the book did say that can be annoying. So if you do have neighbors that are sensitive to such things, that would be something to bear in mind if you are going to raise them in a smaller environment, or an environment where they don't have quite as much freedom. You will want to look at that, bear that in mind, and you can factor that in. Definitely do some research about what's available in your area, and kind of move forward from there. Are there any questions? Again, all this information was taken from Stories Guide to Raising Chickens by Gail Damrow. Thank you for coming.